Scott Grayson from Fox 29 and 97.3 ESPN.com. You know him from Grayson's Grades. He grades the Eagles after every game. So we'll get his thoughts and grades on the season and what he thought about the game the other night. Obviously has some takes on that. His grades are up for the Eagles in Washington now at 97.3 ESPN.com. So let's bring in Scott Grayson on the Boardwalk Honda hotline and get his thoughts on where they are now, what's next. And really, Scott, you know, we'll grade what you thought their effort was the other night and how what your take was on what we saw in that game, which has obviously made national news and people questioning Peterson and the Eagles and the way they handled that game the other night.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a crazy ending to an otherwise brutal season. So, yeah, I mean, that to me was not sense that, you know, if you were going to play Nate Sudfeld in that game, I don't know why all week you wouldn't have been saying that to the media. And quite frankly, I don't think Nate Sudfeld looked like he was prepared to go into the game. I felt like he looked like he hadn't even thrown a pass all week. Everything was off. He looked confused. He looked befuddled. His passes were inaccurate. I don't expect him to be, you know, zinging it right on the money for a guy who really hasn't even dressed all season. But look, if you know you're going to play in his position, you're going to take full advantage of that opportunity to put something on film to try to find a job somewhere else if you're not sticking around here. And to me, it just looked like a guy who was thrown out there who thought he was holding the clipboard the entire game. And, you know, I get the argument that if the Giants wanted to be in the playoffs, they should have won more than 6 games. Fully right there. I think if any team in this division wanted to be in the playoffs, they really should have won more games. But, you know, that being said, I think if you take the record out of the whole mix, you know, at some point the Eagles have been in that position where you want somebody to go out there that's playing in a game where if they win, it helps you. I know the Eagles weren't playing for anything. In my opinion, I think unless you're looking to play Sudfeld the entire game, I mean, as it was, you didn't dress many of your players. I just think the Eagles were caught off guard. They expected Washington to come in there and, quite frankly, act like they wanted to win the division, and Washington didn't do that. And all of a sudden they found themselves in a tight game going into the fourth quarter. And I think, in my personal opinion, I think Hurts should have stayed out there. I would have liked to have seen what does the rookie do in a fourth quarter? Is he able to come back against a team that's playing for its playoff life? We will never know that answer. And so I think you could even play it out further than what it meant for the Giants.
Scott, what do you make of the reports that are coming out that veteran players were going to approach Doug on the sideline? They had to be held back. I mean, does that make you – I don't know where you felt about Doug coming back or not, but does that make you have to – even if you thought, you know what, Doug should come back, he's won a Super Bowl, do you have to question whether or not he should come back if you're hearing that these players were essentially attacking him or wanted to attack him, I should say?
Yeah. If, in fact, this was Doug's decision entirely 100% and not something that came down from above or was a joint decision, then I have to question whether or not he does come, because I got to believe Jeffrey Lurie was hearing this from all the other owners in the league. I got to believe Roger Goodell may have reached out and said, you know, what was that? You know, I think there's certainly some of that going on. So you got to wonder if he's going to – all along there were the reports over the weekend that Doug was coming back, but there was the reports that there was this meeting on Tuesday, and I felt all along that how this meeting goes Tuesday is going to decide today, you know, whether or not Doug is back. And then I thought yesterday, well, you know, they sent Doug and Howie out there together to talk to the media. That must mean they're coming back. Well, they also had Doug out there saying that, you know, some of those assistants last year were coming back, and the next day they were fired. So I'm not putting any stock in anything at this point until Lurie comes out, there's a press release or something put out that says Peterson's coming back, because I think there's a lot going on. You talk about exit interviews with players. If these guys were that mad, which I kind of expect that they would be, because, look, they want to win games. They're not out there caring about draft picks. In those exit interviews with ownership in the front office, I got to believe that some of these captains that talked to Lurie had to have vented their frustration to him about all this. And so I think, yeah, it's going to be part of the factor that's decided whether or not Doug comes back. Whether it's a big enough amount of what Lurie puts his stock into, I don't know. We'll find out. But, Mike, let me ask you this. I mean, could you imagine if fans were in the stands at that game, what we would have heard all season long? And then also, you talk about what we do in the media here. Had we been able to get into the locker room after that game, that would have been quite frankly, I think very amazing in that moment to hear those players speaking right after it happened when we're standing at their lockers to hear all that.
Well, and that's one of the things.
We didn't have that night.
That's one of the things, Scott, I was going to ask you a little bit further on in this conversation, but you just brought it up. You've been covering this team for, 5 years? You've been on the road, and there's many times we'll say, what was it like in that locker room? And you give us a great, man, it was really somber in there. I remember talking to you after a game in Tennessee where you were like, man, it was really, really somber. You guys didn't get that opportunity this year, to just really get a feel of where this thing went wrong, what was happening inside there. Do these guys like each other? That is something that really got taken from us.
Yeah, and I think that's from the reporting standpoint, not just from what I would have talked about or put out there or seen. Every other reporter that would have had access in there and seen the same stuff. I mean, we would have been at all those different lockers. Instead, you get these Zooms. And quite frankly, a lot of the times, the same questions asked of the same player, of different players, just to see if they answer it differently. Well, by the time you get to the fourth, fifth, sixth guy, I mean, they've all been talking as they come out of there. What were you asked? They know what's coming. It's not the same as when you're standing in a locker room and you ask a question, you genuinely see that you asked something that somebody is not really prepared to have answered. They have to think for a moment about it. And you get, honestly, some of these guys, I've talked to you many times about, you get some of that coach speak or that player speak where they're just following the cliches. But guys like Lane Johnson, Jason Kelsey, to me, they've been, and I've said Malcolm in the past, Jenkins, Brandon Graham, they've all been honest in the moment to tell you what they were thinking. Chris Long was another great one. Connor Barr went overtime. He was great. Zach Ertz, and you got real Zach, yesterday, but you're missing out on reading that locker room right after. And I think there's a lot of good stuff. Like you brought up that I've mentioned in the past, I've picked up on a lot of things in that locker room from body language that to me says a lot more than anything that they say, verbally. And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle that, quite frankly, we've missed out on. Locker clean-out day, you get to be in there. We find out now Carson Wentz he refused to speak to the media. There's a guy we really need to hear from. And to me, it says a lot, the fact that he didn't speak. It also says a lot to me about his, to me, it's a lack of leadership not to come out and speak after this season on his part. So there's a lot here that I think we can certainly read into and try to, translate, but we're certainly missing out the body language part of it that you see when you're in that locker room in the moments after these wins and losses.
Yeah, you read my mind. I was going to go down the road of the fractured relationship report that came out over the weekend, and then here's an opportunity for Carson to speak to the media, and he declines. And I was just wondering, if you're his agent, for example, do you look at this situation and say, okay, what's the pros? What's the cons? Is there anything that can come out that can really benefit you here? Or can you maybe slip up and say the wrong thing, and then it gets even worse? But, you hear Doug Peterson say that he hasn't spoken to Carson Wentz about it. And when you saw with the Sixers, Ben Simmons was available for James Harden, what happened? Daryl Morey was tweeting away. Doc Rivers picked up the phone and said that he spoke to Ben Simmons right away. That's the big disconnect for me, is none of these guys are on the same page. Carson not talking, Doug not having any conversations about it. It's just so ridiculous that we're here in this spot.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And in my opinion, I feel like all season long, this has felt like a huge dysfunctional family that, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. You could extend that from the owner down to the GM, to the coaches, to the players, where you just felt like everybody was not on the same page here. And I would argue that, if you're Carson, did this organization do best by you this year? No. But at the same token, did you do the best you could have? Are you at blame here? Yeah, certainly. And I think if he'd have come out and said something along those lines, look, I flat out stunk this year. Let's call it what it is. Do I need to get better? Yes. Am I going to go into this offseason more motivated than I've ever been before? Yes. And I failed this season to do many things, and I'm going to fix it. And it is my goal to try to fix it here. But if it's not here, there's so many ways he could have handled that and come out with his head held high, and the organization could have looked a little bit worse for the wear. By not talking, though, it shows a lack of leadership. It does. I believe the reports that there's a fractured relationship between Doug and Carson. Doug didn't call things. You look at where they were in 2017. It felt like that offense and the coaches and Carson were all on the same page from the moment the ball was snapped to the preparation throughout the week. This year, it felt far from that. Like there was never a conversation of Carson saying to Doug, this is what I really like to do because I feel most confident doing this. Why isn't that done? It was called the same way every game. And so I feel like there's a lot of disconnect there. And quite frankly, you're going to find out who Jeffrey Lurie believes more in, Doug Peterson or Carson Wentz, because I think they're both potentially feeling that they can't coexist together anymore. So let's find out how the chips fall, and I think that's going to tell us a lot of where perhaps the biggest blame lied.
Scott Grayson, Fox 29 and 97.3 ESPN.com. His Grayson's grades for the Eagles-Washington game. Let's real quick look at a couple of grades, not so much for the game itself, but for the year. And look at Jalen Hurts. I mean, when you're looking at him in a 4-game, you gave him a B for the game the other night. Now, some people would think that was even being generous. He was 7 of 20. His QB rating was about a 25. On the year, he completes 52% of his passes. So how do you grade what we saw from Hurts, and how do you translate that to your decision for next year with him?
Well, let me start first with the game the other night and say that, yes, I gave him a B, but stats didn't translate into a B. But how many passes did he throw down the field, draw holding penalties or pass interferences? The ball was moving, and it was maybe not completed, not showing and helping his completion percentage or his yardage total, but he was moving that team down the field, and he was at least keeping that offense going. I think overall for his 4 games that he played, I would give Jalen Hurts a C. I think there's a lot more room for him to grow on. But as a rookie quarterback who wasn't the starter going into the year and had to pick up the torch in the last month of the season and try to get his team into the postseason, I liked what I saw. My eye test says he has the chance to be good. And there's a lot to build off of for a rookie to go off of what he learned here, I would imagine, in this rookie season. I liked what I saw from his decision-making. Quite frankly, he would drop back and he would make a decision in a hurry and he would act upon it. Carson Wentz dropped back many times this season and just looked confused and was waiting to make a decision, and it resulted in sacks. Maybe Jalen didn't make the best decision at the time, but he made a decision and did something with it. He extended plays well. I like the way he ultimately would decide to run. He looked like Russell Wilson at times where when he got out of the pocket, I felt like he was always looking to throw, not necessarily looking to tuck it and run unless he absolutely had to. I think there's a lot to build off of there for Jalen Hurts. I was fine with what I saw out of him, and I really, I'll go back to say, I was looking forward to seeing if he could have led that team with a bunch of, certainly not the best starting lineup out there with him, to a win over Washington in that fourth quarter, and we were robbed of seeing if that would have happened. But overall, I'd give Jalen Hurts a C.
Well, let me throw this at you. If you move on from Carson Wentz and you say Jalen Hurts is going to be one of our quarterbacks, would you then rule out drafting another quarterback? Like, if you move on from Wentz, what is your plan? At that point, we know they value a backup quarterback, right? That's what they sold you when they picked Jalen Hurts. So would that rule out drafting a quarterback with the 6th overall pick? What would you do with the backup quarterback at that spot?
Yeah, see, I don't want to touch. I really don't want to touch any of the drafting a quarterback in this year. In my opinion, what they should do and what I would do is try to find a way to get them all to coexist. If you decide you want to bring Doug back, you find a way to get them to coexist together. You give them that ultimatum that I'm not going to make this easy on either one of you guys. You have to find a way to coexist. And Carson, if you want to play, if you want to start, if you want to be the guy to go out and earn what I'm paying you, then go earn that starting job back. And I would have that way what this organization likes to have, which is a good backup quarterback. Whether it's Jalen Hurts or Carson Wentz that wins the quarterback battle, you've got a good quarterback there, and you don't need to try to figure that problem out right now. There's so many other holes on this team and things that you can fix. The NFL does afford you that luxury to fix a lot of things in an offseason if you do it right. And I would rather see this team, this franchise, use the draft and free agency to go figure out some of the other problems they have here than to deal with that. I think that, look, you want to be a leader, you want to be paid this money. I'm not going to make it easy on you and let you go somewhere else unless somebody is desperate enough to give me the farm. If they're willing to give me, a first-round pick and some other draft picks and maybe another piece to the puzzle that I need, they want him that bad, fine. They can have Carson Wentz. But for right now, I would go into it saying, these guys, Carson, you go fight for your job. Jalen, be ready for a quarterback competition. And I know I've got 2 good quarterbacks, which a lot of teams in this league don't have.
Here's my last thought, Scott. 2012, 4-12. Reed gets fired. That year, they lost 4 starters on the offensive line. The next year, Chip Kelly comes in. They win 10 games. A lot of that was with the same players. They just were hurt. You lost Jason Peters. You lost Kelsey, and I forget some of the linemen from that team. But you had 4 of your 5 starting offensive linemen hurt. Is it as simple as you're going to get Lane Johnson back, you're going to get Brandon Brooks back, you're going to have a left tackle, and that their offensive line is back intact, that this team should be competitive again?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but you have to look at that at the same token. One of my biggest problems with this team is they're old, and a lot of those guys, will Jason Kelsey be back, number one, or does he choose to retire? Lane Johnson's been getting nicked up more and more as the years have ticked by. Certainly Father Time's catching up with him a little bit more. Brandon Brooks has been injured. When he's out there, he's one of the best guards in the league. Lane Johnson's one of the best tackles in the league. When they're out there, they're very, very effective. And I think that, yes, this offensive line is showing signs. What are you going to do with Andre Dillard and Jordan Mailata? Which one gets the tackle? Do you train the other one to be Lane Johnson's backup? Or do you try to move one of them to guard? Who's center if Kelsey leaves? Probably say Amalu, so you need another guard. So that they've got some question marks there. But you're right, Mike. I mean, they're going to get good on the offensive line to start the season, provided those guys can recover, rehab, be healthy. I mean, it was amazing. Brandon Brooks was even having his practice window open there this past week. After what he had to deal with his, off-season injury and surgery. So I think, yeah, you can get better there. The question is, you've got to also start investing in the future there. And I think one draft pick at least has to be devoted, in my opinion, to the offensive line to try to fill in some of that hole.
Yeah.
Maybe you decide, say, Amalu is a solid guard. Let's leave him there. We need to find another center, and that's what you do through the draft. I don't know. I mean, I think that they definitely, though, you're right. I mean, is this a 4-win team next year? I don't think so. I don't think it should be. But there's certainly some questions that they have to figure out. Offensive line's one of them, but getting healthy will definitely help.
And we got months to dive into it. Scott Grayson, Fox 29, and, of course, Grayson's Grades at 97.3 ESPN.com. We will check in with him throughout the offseason when the Eagles make news. And, of course, when that happens, you'll hear it right here on the Sports Best. Scott, appreciate it, man.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Scott Grayson, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.